Right now, across a frozen river in Tianjin, sits a financial district designed to be a replica of Manhattan. It's called Yujiapu, and despite billions in investment, its towering skyscrapers are largely empty. Further south, in Hainan, there is Ocean Flower Island. This is a $22 billion artificial archipelago shaped like an orchid. Today, it struggles to draw visitors, and authorities have already ordered parts of the resort to be demolished. These are symbols of a specific growth model, building massive structures to drive GDP. For years, the priority was to keep pouring concrete, regardless of whether there was an actual market demand for the finished space. That strategy of building first and finding residents later has stalled, leaving behind a landscape of non-performing assets. The fallout is visible in the collapse of developers like Evergrande. After regulators investigated billions in inflated revenues, the company's ability to borrow vanished, bringing construction to a halt. This hit local governments directly. Municipalities that relied on land sales to fund their budgets are now carrying debt levels that are increasingly difficult to service. The scale of the construction freeze is immense. Roughly 20 million pre-sold residential units sit unfinished across the country, homes that families have already paid for. Completing these units would require an estimated 3 trillion yuan. This funding gap has effectively paralyzed the traditional real estate sector. Large-scale vanity projects are no longer receiving easy capital or state approval. This shift has created a vacuum, forcing a search for a more sustainable way to deploy investment. The bubble relied on a specific municipal funding loop. Local governments assessed land values based on future growth projections rather than current worth. They used that high assessment as collateral to secure bank loans, borrowing enormous sums against land values that hadn't materialized. In Tianjin, the government borrowed an amount nearly equal to its entire annual GDP just to fund the construction of its replica financial district. Maintaining this building pace often involved cutting regulatory corners. In Hainan, developers used unsanctioned sand dredged directly from the sea to build the orchid-shaped archipelago, bypassing environmental standards to keep the project moving. When the land value stopped rising, the loop broke. Borrowing against future growth only works if that growth is real, and for many of these megaprojects, it simply wasn't. However, the problem isn't a lack of consumer demand. If you look at Dadanghai Square in Sanya, the environment is functional and active. It's filled with tourists and local businesses. Dadanghai works because the infrastructure matches how people actually live. People want access to travel, food, and recreation, and they spend their money where those needs are met. This is organic spending. It stands in direct contrast to the debt-heavy, speculative investments that built the empty cities of the north. The current crisis is forcing a pivot in strategy. Instead of continuing to expand outward with new construction, the focus is shifting toward making the existing built environment more productive. One model taking the place of new construction is energy performance contracting. Known as EPC, this is a system where an energy company invests in a building's efficiency, and that investment is repaid through the actual energy savings generated. Rather than adding to the 3 trillion yuan funding gap with more new buildings, capital is being directed into upgrading the efficiency of the millions of square meters China has already built. The Shenzhen Center for Disease Control used this model for a public retrofit. And ASCO provides the tech and financing, removing the need for upfront capital. Even ghost cities are targeted. In Yujiapu, new investments focus on smart city infrastructure, like integrated street lighting. These pilot projects show a change in how capital is allocated, moving away from building for the sake of volume and toward investments with a direct, measurable utility. The model functions by removing the need for property owners to take on new debt. The ESCO installs the technology, and their payment is siphoned from the guaranteed energy savings. If the building doesn't become more efficient, the investor doesn't get paid. This requires rigorous math. Teams use international protocols to verify exactly how many kilowatts are saved, a sharp departure from the speculative appraisals that defined the property bubble. The market for these retrofits grew from just over 1 billion to 74 billion yuan in less than a decade. While it is still a fraction of the total real estate sector, it represents a 50-fold increase in investment. This growth signals a shift in priorities. Capital is now being directed toward measurable performance rather than simply adding to the volume of concrete. As the era of the speculative megaproject slows down, the focus has turned to optimization, efficiently retrofitting the world that China has already built.